So if you want the best decks after the buffs and nerfs, you've come to the right place. These are the top 7 predicted best decks from yours truly, and let's jump into it. The first one is going to be Quest Warrior. It was the strongest deck coming into this expansion win rate wise. It actually was at every rank except for top 1000 legend. And it barely got nerfed. The only thing that was nerfed was Bloodsail Raider becoming a 2-1 again. A 1 mana 2-1 that gives you some mana chi is still not even that bad. I mean, it's slightly weaker, but it's still going to run the exact same way. It's still a 1 mana pirate that you could use to help cheese out Rokara turn 6 sometimes, so on and so forth. And a lot of other very powerful decks were also nerfed, which means that this deck got probably the least nerfed of the powerful decks, and it was already the most powerful. So it's gonna be really, really strong. If you don't have Provoke, it is an epic, it's not required. You could run Barov, which is a legendary, but one that is probably one of the more common legendaries, which I think would be good. Or you could potentially run like a Rustroth Viper to destroy weapons, or a Heavy Plate if you think that you're going to need a little bit of armor into more aggro decks, and it's tradable too, so you get to draw a card with it. Honestly, the only card in this deck I would change is maybe Provoke if you don't want to run the epic, and that's about it. This deck is absolutely phenomenal. I would run it if you don't care about running new cards. Speaking of decks that use no new cards, Face Hunter. I think Face Hunter is the second strongest deck in the game, and let me explain. 1, it's good against Quest Warrior in general, which I already predicted was going to be the strongest deck in the game. 2, it is really fast and will beat those few extra stragglers, those OTK decks that are trying to hold on to their combos. And to be fair, I still think that a lot of these combo decks will be good. It's just Face Hunter typically excels against this matchup. And 3, now that people are going to start playing some control decks again, they're not going to be optimized. So early on, after nerfs and buffs and expansions and stuff like that, hard aggro decks like Face Hunter usually thrive. So at least for the next week or two, this will be really good. And if you don't want to commit to these 2 legendaries, although I think Barrack is very, very strong, if you don't want to commit to the 2 legendaries, you could run 2 Bloodseekers because the weapon can just scale really, really well, and it's a common, and it is a new card, so you could potentially get some extra flavor that way. Or you could run a Trog even after the nerfs. It's still a pretty decent 1-drop. Now this one might be a little bit controversial, but I think the 3rd strongest deck in the game is Deathrattle Priest, and let me explain why. Because combo decks got nerfed, this means 2 things. 1, aggro decks will be played more because they can beat combo decks a little bit more consistently because they're, slightly slower. And 2, control decks will become a little bit more meta because they might be able to beat a combo deck because they're slowed down a little bit and they're going to take advantage of the increased aggro decks. Where Deathrattle Priest comes in is it is a control deck that can get absolutely insane value. And then once you play Xyrella, it could do 5 damage to the opponent's face every 2 turns, which is also really, really good and can close out games. Basically, it's going to outvalue other control decks and have enough control and resource generation to deal with aggro decks. You're going to probably lose to combo, but currently I'm 8-2 with this deck. Only 2 games I've lost have been to a Garrote Rogue and a combo Warlock. Everything else I've beat, especially Paladin, because Hysteria just works really, really well against that. And you have silences to deal with their buffs. Overall, I really like this deck. I'm a little bit biased, but I would highly recommend checking it out. It is a little bit expensive though, so if you can't play this one, I definitely understand. So the next deck on this list is Libram Paladin. And Libram Paladin, I think that its ceiling in terms of power level is a little bit lower than some of the next decks that are going to come out, but I think that the floor is significantly higher because it is an extremely simple deck to play. Basically, the main goal of this deck is to play cards on tempo, pump them up, make them as big as possible, and slam them into your opponent with stats that they simply cannot deal with, and Divine Shield in a lot of situations. I will admit that the nerfs did affect this deck. The Trog nerf was so bad that I basically took it out of the deck and threw in a Murgur McGurgle and a Rustroth Viper. You could take out the Rustroth Viper and actually run a Libram of Justice if you want, because it is a Libram card and it's pretty solid. I just like running the Rustroth Viper because there are still a decent number of Warlocks and Paladins in the meta. Destroying the weapon can be useful, but depending on where the meta goes, putting in a Libram of Justice could be fine. And then other than that, the Alliance Bannerman doesn't really matter, right? I basically play him only for the draw anyway, and yes, you'll get pinged off a couple more times, but it really doesn't change how the deck plays out. You're still going to try to play Aldar Attendant and Truth Seeker on curve, reduce the cost of your Librams, play Lady Liadrin and the Lightforged Cariel to get insane value late game and or infinite value with Lady Liadrin unless you get silenced, and then just play big minions. Like, the game plan doesn't change. It just is slightly worse. So because of that, it is now number 4 instead of number 1 or 2. So the next deck on this list is Quest Rogue. I think Quest Rogue is a phenomenal deck, and it actually uses a new card, being Shadow Crafter Scabs. Basically, think about it this way. Quest Rogue was already good, but its main weakness was not being able to regain the board if it ever lost it, right? Because it doesn't have any board wipe. Boom. Enter a legendary board wipe that also summons you 2 minions and gives you 2 mana every single turn for free, and next thing you know, it becomes a really, really powerful deck again. It was already a powerful deck, just even more so. And yes, this deck can still kind of lose to pure aggro. And that's what I was saying about Face Hunter, right? As people are playing new decks and experimenting, especially if they're playing Rogue a little bit more along with Quest Warrior, Face Hunter will excel. But other than Face Hunter, this deck has the potential to beat basically anything, right? You've got really good efficient removal with the SI Assassin, as well as the new, well not new, but somewhat new, SI Operative. This card's actually way better than I thought it was going to be, and a great finisher with the Battle Master and Scabs when you complete the quest, or Mr. Smite, 10 Woo, Mr. Smite again for 9 mana, or 7 if you have Shadow Crafter Scabs out. Basically, this deck has a lot of options, a lot of cheap cards. You can generate a ton of tempo while drawing insane amounts of cards and also having a solid late game. It's just a really solid deck all around. That's all I gotta say. So close your eyes and picture this. One of the best decks in the game that people have been wanting to be nerfed for about 4, if not 5 months now. A deck that has been nerfed 5 or more times and still remains extremely dominant, receives another nerf. But again, it misses the mark, and it will remain probably one of the top 7 decks in the game. I think that this could be as high as in the number 2 deck, because Face Hunter will fall off as people optimize their builds. Deathrattle Priest loses to OTKs, and Libram Paladin will lose to decks like this if they're fully optimized. And depending on where the meta goes, you can take out Full-Blown Evil for Hysteria, but more on that in a second. Overall, this deck is still going to dominate the ladder for the same reasons it's dominated the ladder in the past. It's got really good, efficient, cheap removal. It's got good mid-game win conditions with Flesh Giant and giving him Wind Fury with the, the Battleground Battlemaster. But it has a new hero that essentially wipes the board and gives you 5 HP, and gives you a new hero power that will summon you 3/3s and you no longer have to take damage. So, that's not a huge deal, but at the end of the day, you're gonna do damage with fatigue, and it'll probably be fine. Like, if you have taken most of your damage and you just play something like Raise Dead, you could finish your quest and it's no big deal. Overall, the deck is still gonna be ridiculously strong, maybe even the second best deck in the game. So if you haven't picked this deck up already, pick it up now. And the last deck on this list, which is more of like a last-ditch effort to try to push this deck, is Deathrattle Demon Hunter. I think this deck is actually a lot better than people give credit for. It's got really good late-game potential with Kurtrus because you're still able to do the Kurtrus, Expendable Performer, Fellfire, Dreadeye, potential OTK. I think it actually ends up doing only about 28 damage for 10 mana, not 30, but you do a lot of damage. You have a good finisher with Illidari Inquisitor as well. Good tempo because all of your minions are very sticky. You kill them, they summon a whole new thing that you have to deal with, you being the opponent. And you have decent card draw with Tusk Piercer, the Peddler to trade stuff away, and the Skull of Gul'dan, and even Death Speaker Blackthorn to help you summon 3 minions from your deck. I think this deck just has a lot of good tempo and has a much higher win rate than people give it credit for. Like, this deck is actually quite strong. I would recommend giving it a try. And if you don't have all of the legendaries, you can at least take out Korak and put in another draw card or a Raging Fell Screamer to help reduce the cost of something like the Inquisitor or the Piggyback Imp. There are things that you could do without some of these legendaries, and it would still run extremely strong. If you don't want to run Kurtrus, then take out Expendable Performers and Dreadeye as well. Run more Deathrattle minions. Run maybe 1 or 2 more late game Illidari Inquisitor kind of demon big dudes to help close out games. But other than that, it'll run very similarly to how it has in the past. And I think it has too high of a win rate to not be noticed right now. So that is it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the tier list. I hope to see you guys in the next one. Bye.